if you look at the, when I tell people that I'm a big supporter of China, and especially that I have pretty positive feelings about Confucianism, I often get told that I'm a communist, you know, uh, as if that's bad. Um, I guess I have two thoughts on that. The first is something my mother had talked about. It reminds me actually of Jane Addams' blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, if you know what that is, which was an early sociological experiment, which can never be done again because everybody would sue everybody. But in that experiment, really quickly, Jane Addams was I think she was an elementary school, primary school teacher. And one day she said to her class, all the students who have blue eyes are better than the students who have brown eyes. You're better. You get an extra 15 minutes at recess. You get seconds at lunch. You can ask questions the other students can't. They're better. And, the students didn't know what to do with this information, but she did that for, I think it was a day or two. And, when the students would fight, she would just say, you can't fight with the kids with blue eyes because they're better. And then after 2 days, she switched it up and she said to the kids, now the kids with the brown eyes are better. And the kids with the blue eyes, they are not as smart. They're not as nice. They're not as successful. They're just kind of lower quality people. The people with the brown eyes are better. They get 15 minutes extra at recess. They get seconds at lunch. They get whatever. She did this. You can find videos on it of YouTube. And, obviously you can never do this again because kids would go home and tell their parents and they would sue the school. But they've done follow-up interviews with the kids who've said that as they grew up, this was one of the things that most shaped their lives, and particularly how they raised their own children. And they said that this was something that really taught them about racism. It taught them about the sheer stupid superficiality, the absurdity of saying that because this person looks different in a way that has nothing to do with their decisions, with anything other than they happen to look that way, they're better, they're worse. And it's really beautiful if you watch videos of the kids giving interviews, 30 years later about how it changed their lives. So, that's one thing when I think about communism. And the reason I say that is my mother was telling me when she was a child that all of the different, classes and grades would often have an experiment where they would say to the kids, if you could organize society, how would you do it? And the kids kind of came together. We're talking about primary school age. So 12 years old, let's say, for example. Should there be homeless people? No. I mean, if we have enough money to build housing for them, should there be people who don't have enough to eat, don't have clothes to wear in the winter? Should education be something only the rich get? Should people have health care? Any 12-year-old child who's not already brainwashed by the sickness of the idea that, no, we shouldn't take care of each other. We should let people starve in the street. We should let people be homeless. We should give people no health care, no education, no food. That's a crazy idea. I mean, all kids know that. We have to literally be taught about capitalism. And if you read, there's lots of stories. For example, Max Weber talks about times where the British Empire went into places like India, into small traditional villages. And it's not just Weber talking about this. There are lots of stories about this in history where a colonial power would come in with these capitalist ideas. Hey, the more you work, the more money you can make. And what they would find is that people's goal is not to see how much money they could make. A lot of traditional villages, they would work until they had enough, and then they wanted to go home and spend time with their family. It's just like the famous Hawthorne experiments conducted by the person who took credit for them was Elton Mayo, because he was the Harvard professor. Were they all conducted by him? My understanding is no. Either way, if you look it up, it's Elton Mayo. Mayo, and the Hawthorne experiments. And, one of the things they found, and I know I'm going all over the place here, one of the things they found is that when they offered to pay people piecemeal, so the more you produce, the more money you get, a lot of people stopped before they could have produced more. But what they discovered there in that experiment, or what they took away from it, because they were just studying efficiency and scientific management, is they discovered that when people produce too much, more than everybody else, all the other people started bullying them. They would punch them in the arm and say, hey man, stop working so hard. You're making the rest of us look bad. And then the people who could produce a lot chose to produce less because they would rather be accepted and rather have friends and a social life than be outcasts with more money. And ironically, that's, the beginning of the human relations school of management. But ironically, if you look at society now, you have people who are absolutely outcasts from their family, from society, but they are so far above everybody else that upper tier, that echelon of people is, it's considered, I guess by them, that they make that trade-off to have this sort of insane wealth. So the point of all of this is that to say I'm a communist, in my mind, is more like saying I believe there shouldn't be homeless people who don't have food, healthcare, and education. Now, there's a whole other side of people who need mental health care, who, even if you give them resources, they're just not able to make use of those resources. Well, okay, we need mental health care for people too. None of this is new. Any 12-year-old child knows it. When I say I support China, and the way, in a lot of ways, the way they've done things, I don't mean communism. If you look at the amount of time that China, the civilization, the ethne, because you can't say nation or state or country, that's all from the 1640s earliest. So China, the civilization, if you say they have 5,000 years, and they've been a communist country since 1949, that amount of time, if you were to adjust for America. America is not 5,000 years old, at least not the United States of America. That's 250 years old. So the amount of time that the Chinese civilization has been communist and the amount of time that amount would be in America would be approximately 3 years. Would anybody like to judge the entirety of American history, all the way from the Revolutionary War and the Federalist Papers and all the ideas John Locke and Madison and Franklin and, these ideas, were they a bunch of rich white men who did not think black people were humans and did not and believed women were property? Yeah, they were. So, they're not necessarily an aspirational group of people. But we're talking 3 years of America would be, adjusted for civilizational length, would be the communist period in China. So when I say I like China, I'm not talking about a modern day autocracy or, America's a plutocracy, but what I'm really talking about in a lot of ways is Confucianism. And, today, because the one thing I wanted to mention is Confucius said if there was just one thing that would be more important than anything else, it would be zhengming, the rectification of names, which would really just means being honest, having the government be honest. Be honest about how much money you collected. Be honest about how it's spent. Be honest about weights and measurements. We all saw shrinkflation during COVID, where a box of cereal would be, as an example, would be the same height, but would get narrower and narrower. And we see this with portion size. When you look at a pack of chips or, a box of cereal or something, and it says a portion is, a half of a cup of something, but nobody really eats that amount. Or maybe somebody does. I certainly don't, and I don't know anybody who does, because it's dishonest. It's shrinkflation is dishonest. Insider trading is dishonest. Lying about inflation, lying about the amount of money that's being constantly printed, it's all dishonest. And as long as we have politicians who are dishonest and a government that's dishonest, where the goal is really to enrich oneself, we don't have zhengming. And I'm not saying China does. I'm saying Confucius said that was the most important thing. And I'm prone to agree with that. I think and that again is why I care about the blockchain, not because I'm into crypto or because I'm a crypto bro or, the blockchain, one of its central fundamental building blocks is that it provides transparency. And I think we live in such a time without transparency that everything just becomes obfuscated and everybody feels lied to. And a lot of the loss of trust that we have in institutions is due to a lack of transparency. So that's my thoughts on that.